to the 1000 Authors Show. I am Vicky Quinn Fraser, and today I am interviewing James Pogson, who is informally known as LinkedIn's Poet Laureate. He is an expert on writing, narrative storytelling, being Black, British, and a humorist. And I got him onto the show today to talk about the importance of narrative storytelling, the importance of telling individual stories in the wider context of the world, because it's the only way anything's ever going to change is for people to actually listen to stories that people are telling and have the opportunity to tell their stories. We talk about all kinds of things, ranging from racism to writing while Black, to the importance of telling stories so that people are seen as individuals and not monoliths. And a lot of what you're going to hear is probably going to make you feel a bit uncomfortable. And you know what? Good. Because we should be uncomfortable. We need to hear this stuff. We need to hear what life is like for Black people in Britain and around the world in reality every day. We need to hear about the fact that quite often Black people censor themselves because they don't feel like they can say stuff without offending our delicate little sensibilities. And that's got to change. So I really hope that you enjoy this episode. It's great. James is a very entertaining speaker, and I really hope that you learn a few things. I really hope it encourages you to open your eyes and ears and listen a little bit more to what's going on around it. It certainly has for me. So without further ado, enjoy this episode. Hey James, thank you so much for coming on to the 1000 Authors Show, and welcome. Thank
you very much, Vicky.
James is a writer, a narrative storyteller, known informally as LinkedIn's Poet Laureate, which I absolutely love. But I'm going to shut up and I would like you to talk a little bit. Tell us who you are. What do you do?
Well, I am a writer, but principally I see myself as a storyteller. I've been a writer full-time since 1995, April 1995. So I've written for film, theatre, TV, radio, in print. I've been a copywriter for 16 years. Well, technically I retired in December because I thought, you know what, James, just write about what you want to write about. Use your voice, help other people to tell their stories and find their own voice.
I love that. I'm going to ask you a bit more about what you've worked on in the past if we have time, but I really want to talk about the importance of storytelling, because you call yourself a storyteller, which is quite right. Why is it so important to you to be able to help other people to find their voices, lift their voices, tell their stories?
Right. I've been having a lot of conversations over the past few years, really, with people, and not necessarily writers or necessarily people in the creative industry. But I'm talking to people about their own personal narratives. And I call narrative the telling of your story. So for example, if somebody was saying, oh, I was in a relationship and I don't know why it worked out, why it didn't work out, I help people to understand their own particular story. And you are the hero of your own story. You are the protagonist. There are obstacles, there's conflict, internal and external. For all the writers there thinking, oh yes, internal conflict is the hardest to write and it's the most interesting as well. But as human beings, most of our conflict is internal. Because I have a saying, wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why particularly, because people listening to this on the podcast obviously can't see you. James is a Black British writer. And so let's talk a little bit about that, because this obviously you're writing whilst Black, which may become the title of the podcast, is getting a lot more media at the moment, as it bloody should be. But can you talk a bit more about storytelling and narrative storytelling in that framework and why it's particularly important to you at the moment?
Right. I'll give you an example. Hopefully, everybody listening has heard of what they call the Windrush generation.
I would hope so.
My parents were part of what we call the Windrush generation. My dad came over to Britain from the Caribbean in 1957. My mom came in 1960. Even though they were both from the same island, St. Kitts, which is 38 square miles, they did not know each other in St. Kitts. They met each other here in England.
Okay.
So we've all heard of the Windrush generation. So we understand, or we think we understand, the Windrush story. But, as I said, both my parents are from the same island. They have completely different narratives. So I find that when people are talking about the Black experience, they focus on a story. They talk about, nobody really talks nowadays about the fact that the SS Windrush was one ship. They call it the Windrush generation. I'm looking at personal narratives, in particular personal Black narratives, because from my perspective, for hundreds of years now, Black people, we are still fighting for our humanity. Yesterday was the start of the trial over the George Floyd murder. And I remember when he was murdered on the 25th of May, the day before my birthday, people were saying, I can't believe it's so inhumane. And I said, what makes you think that the police officer thought he was a human? Because as much as America had to talk about the civil rights, if you look at that, they weren't even asking for equal rights. They're just asking to be treated civil. Mm-hmm. And they couldn't even get that. So I look at the whole thing from a Black perspective to say, not all Black people are the same. I keep hearing about this Black community. I don't hear about white community. I hear about Black leaders, community leaders. I never hear about white community leaders. If a white guy commits a crime, it's an individual white guy. If Peter Sutcliffe, aka the Yorkshire Ripper, had been a Black guy, wow, I don't think my dad and his friends would have survived a week, because every Black man in Britain would have been seen as a serial rapist, whereas Peter Sutcliffe was a lone individual.
Yeah.
But when a Black person does something, somehow it's the collective. When it's negative, it's the collective. When it's positive, it's a one-off, isn't it?
Yeah. And also the label mentally ill is put onto Black people as if that, onto white people, onto white perpetrators, as if that is somehow an excuse or a humanization of what they've done. And so, yeah, this is why I love what you're doing, because it's so important to hear people's individual stories, like you say. So can you tell us a little bit about how you go about bringing people's stories out, and maybe some of the resistance that people might feel to putting their stories out there, and how you would persuade people to tell their stories anyway?
Well, it's a bit of give and take, really. I'm talking to a lot of Black people who are saying, because we've been working from home for the past year, we've been able to be our true selves. And I'm like, what do you mean? I don't get that. Having been a freelancer for now 26 years, I'm like, what do you mean your true self? Because, I could get to be myself. So I said, so you can't be yourself at work? I said, no, my full Black self. And I'm like, okay, so who are you at work then? I don't get it, but I do. But what it is, I'm finding a lot of Black people are saying, we're having to modify our behavior in the workspace. Not because we're angry or aggressive, but because white people might perceive us as being angry and aggressive. I mean, I had the example, the last place I worked at, white woman, I'm 6 foot. There's a white woman who's 5'9", used to effing blind in the open plan office all the time. One of the Black women there, 5'4", finished the phone conversation, hung up and kissed their teeth, which is going. Everyone, including the same 5'9" woman, said, "Oh, that's a bit aggressive, isn't it?" Yeah. So I'm like, so a white woman standing up and shouting, effing and blinding, fine. A Black woman going is aggressive. So, and being I've only ever been the only Black male working in any organization I've worked in. And I said to myself, James, do not raise your hands above shoulder height. You might think, no, that's ridiculous. But it might be seen as being aggressive. I never shouted, never raised my voice, because I didn't want what I called the Rodney King beating. We all saw what happens with Rodney King. Yeah. Didn't want that to happen to me in an office, because it could happen. So, we thought he was being aggressive. So it took 15 of us to hold him down, and he accidentally died. So the Black people I'm talking to, it's like, how do we get to be our true selves, show our humanity, as well as hold on to our professionalism? And how do we put that in a manner that people can understand and respond to? And that's what I'm helping them to do.
Yeah. And storytelling, you're right, is by far the best way to do that, because humans have responded to stories right from the beginning of time. So So are you, let me ask you this then, because we hear a lot about, and we should hear a lot, white people certainly should hear a lot about the nonsense that you have to put up with and the violence that you have to put up with. Are you also doing work then to work with people to tell stories of joy as well? Because that I think is equally important, because as white people, I think if all we see is the trauma porn, it's not helpful, because that's dehumanizing as well. So are you working with people as well to bring out their stories of joy and wonder and all of the humanity that is in there that we are not seeing because of the structures that are there in place to stop us seeing that?
Exactly that. I'm talking to them about bringing out their humanity, and that's why I say in every narrative we put forward, it shows our humanity. Because it could be a case of, oh, James, you're nice and you're black. And I've met another one who's a bit like James. And James is, oh my gosh. So James has human-like qualities like me. Ooh. And I've met another person who's black who has human-like qualities. Wow, could it be that black people are human? Well, considering we were the first people on Earth, what do you reckon?
Maybe there's something in that, yeah.
Yeah, but it's amazing that society is still looking for the humanity in black people. And they said, no, I can't find it. But we're looking for life on Mars.
Yeah.
Really? Okay, that's fine.
So how are you helping people then? What are you doing? What's the structure? Because you said you were a copywriter until December, fellow recovering copywriter. What is your business now? How do you help people?
Well, I actually offer what I call narrative clarity coaching.
Awesome.
Yeah. And that's going pretty well, actually, because it's not just writers. I'm getting people say, well, I'm losing a bit of direction in my life. I don't know what to do next.
Mhm.
And I'm saying, okay, let's I've got a 4-step process. And I'm starting off with your own character. Because it's interesting. We can all, if we look at reality TV as an example, you can say, oh, I don't like him, I don't like her. You know everything about that person. When somebody says, oh, tell me a bit about yourself. Oh, I don't really know. So you don't know yourself, but you know someone who you've only ever seen on your TV screen or in a magazine or on your laptop. But it's always the case.
Yeah.
But you know as well as I do, Vicky, that as a writer, especially if you're creating a fictitious character, they still have to be realistic.
Mhm.
We have to give them you need to know whether your character's right-handed or left-handed, what color eyes they have, what's their favorite hobbies, etc., etc., what their fatal flaw is. Look it up if you don't know what that means. But as humans, we don't do that. It's like, oh, we do the same thing, expecting a different result. Oh, because if they could say, oh gosh, my last girlfriend was terrible, the girlfriend before that was terrible, I'm the common denominator. Like two to tango. What about me? No, I'm perfect. Really? Yeah, okay, I slept with a best friend, but I'm perfect. No, you're not. So it's really an examination of your own narrative, starting off with who you are as a person.
I love that. Do you find that people, how do people react to that? Because it's really uncomfortable to look closely at yourself. So do you find that do you find that it's easy to get people to do that? Do you find that you have to work up to it? Is it a struggle? Do people enjoy it when they get going?
I do what I call blunt force humor. So if I think you're chatting rubbish, I tell you you're chatting rubbish, right? So I bring my full self all the time. So it's a case of people want to work with me. If they don't want to work with me, they don't want to work with me. I'm not, because I'm saying it's your story.
Yeah.
What we're working on is your story. If you don't want it to happen, I don't really care, because I've got my story. I know how to tell my story. And I think that's part of the problem. People don't know how to tell stories.
Yeah.
Which is why you get people say, yeah, but what I meant to say was, and I said, so why didn't you say it?
Yeah.
Yeah, but let me explain. Why is your explanation 10 times longer than what you actually said?
Yeah.
Crazy.
It is. Cool. Well, that sounds awesome. And I'm going to ask you to share where people could get in touch with you to find out more about that at the end, because I think it's something, like you say, people really struggle with it. We struggle with telling our own stories. It's the cobbler's shoes. They're never they're never fixed, and it's the same with our own stories. So we'll come back to that in a minute. But I would also like to ask you, when did you start writing? When did you become a writer? What made you want to become a writer?
Well, believe it or not, I was extremely shy at school. I would still actually call myself an introvert. So my first voice was my written voice, because I was that kid at junior school, even at infant school, where the teacher would read out my story. Deeply embarrassing. deeply embarrassing. And as I got older, I got a brother who's 2 years older than me, sorry, because I'm the youngest, and he went to grammar school. So they say, "Oh, your brother's writing all your stuff for you," and I'm like, "No, it's not." And he said, "No, no, James isn't." You know. So, and I think coming from an oral tradition anyway, my parents always told us stories from being back home in the Caribbean. So it just felt natural for me to write stuff down. And at one stage, I actually wanted to be a journalist. Now, I remember when we were at school, we had a careers officer come in, and I was always in the top stream in the secondary school. And I remember walking in, he looked at me, then he put his head down and he said, "So what do you want to do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm good at English. I'd like to do journalism." And he said, "No, no, no. I think a YTS, a youth training scheme, is best for you." And he kind of dismissed me with that. Then I found out afterwards that every black boy in my year was advised to do a YTS. And there were quite a few of us in the top stream. You're thinking, hold on a minute, is this racism? But of course, racism didn't exist, did it, Vicky? Not in those days, he says, tongue in cheek. So I actually wanted to be a journalist, but at the time, the only newspapers I was aware of were the tabloids, the Daily Mirror and the Sun, and especially the Sun was giving black people stress. So I thought to myself, so if I actually ever become a journalist, I'm going to end up in a room, maybe at the Sun, and this is what they think of black people. No, I'm not doing that. So I didn't tell anyone that I declined. I actually turned down a place in journalism college. So I thought to myself, I'm not going to work for the Guardian. I'm going to end up working for the Sun, and that's going to be how.
Yeah.
But I always wanted to tell stories. So the next step was to become a creative writer and to try and write plays and films, etc. I gave that up about 10, 15 years ago because the experiences I was getting from producers who would be telling me what my black characters would behave like. You know, like, oh, he's a drug dealer. Why? Because, and the answer would be, Vicky, because he's black. And these are people like who went to, Oxford and Cambridge telling me because he's black. To the point where I remember stopping a meeting and said, "How many black people do you actually know?" I said, "We don't know any. But you're dictating to me how a black person should be." And I said, "I don't smoke anything." And I went, "That's unbelievable. You're black and you don't smoke." And I'm like, "Oh, come on. Where are you getting this from?"
Yeah.
So I just got fed up of the whole notion of, even when I'm creating a fictitious character, trying to make it realistic, people who have no understanding of black people are dictating what it should be. I'm like, no, I'm done.
All of which is why what you're doing is so very important. And like, I totally understand why you didn't want to go into journalism. And I also think you're exactly what journalism would have needed, because we need those voices. And I'm now thinking, I think we just need to burn the whole of the British media to the ground and start again. And maybe not even do it like that. Maybe do it with bringing people's stories out and getting them to write their books and write their stories in a way that's more democratic and accessible, that isn't controlled by middle-aged white men.
But the thing is, here's my perspective on the whole thing as well. Because black people have been denied a voice for centuries, many of us don't know what our voice sounds like. So for the past 12 months, because of what happened with George Floyd, white people are asking black people, "Tell me your experience." And I got news for you, white people. Black people, we censor what we say to you. Not because of what we're saying is offensive, but because we think that you might find it offensive. We saw it with Sharon Osbourne in America last week.
Yeah.
"You shouldn't cry. I'm the only one who should be crying." The black woman wasn't crying. So why is a white woman telling her not to cry? And why is a white woman crying? When all the black person said is, "Why are you supporting Piers Morgan?" Just a question. If Sharon would have said, "I'm supporting him because of ABC," it's like, okay. But Sharon heard, "Why are you a racist?" when that was not what we said.
Yeah.
So it's this whole situation at the moment where, you could have a black person in an organization and the boss could come up to them and say, "Okay, we need to solve this racism problem. What do you want us to do?" Now, who's to say that every black person is a spokesperson or feels comfortable speaking? So you could get a black person say, "Well, actually, I don't really want to say anything," or "I personally haven't experienced any racism in this organization." So the head man will turn around and say, good news, we've spoken to James, who represents every black person in this organization, and he said there's no racism," end of discussion.
Yeah.
Whereas that wouldn't happen with a white person. People are like, so Vicky, what's your experience? Oh, my experience is fine. Okay, let me go and talk to Todd and find out his experience. Because Vicky wouldn't speak on behalf of every white person in the organization. So
Yeah.
why is it that a black person has to speak on behalf of everyone? I don't even speak on behalf of my family. Come on. So, it's the case. That's why black people, when they hear what do you mean community leader? What? Why are we now, if I'm speaking from a personal perspective, why am I speaking for an entire group or an entire nation? It's ridiculous.
Yeah. It's incredibly frustrating. I mean, I can't even imagine how frustrating it must be for you, but it's frustrating as well, just for the lack of clarity that comes out for people who really need to hear it, and the defensiveness of white people's defensiveness that just gets in the way. And that, for any white people listening who are like starting to feel defensive at the moment, just sit with that for a bit and let it sink in, and then get over it. Because it's like, we've all got to do this. Like, it's taken me a while to get over the defensiveness as well, because we automatically, oh, I'm not a bad person, blah, blah. And it's not even to do with good and bad people. It's just listen.
Here's the one level that I use, because I very rarely have these conversations. The white person saying, oh, sometimes you hear about, say, oh, you're playing the race card. I've not seen, what race card? All I say to white people is, would you like to wake up tomorrow as a black person? And you know the answer. Put it this way, as a man, I wouldn't want to wake up tomorrow as a woman. Right? So as a white person, would you want to wake up black? I bet most of you wouldn't even leave your house. Some of you might even phone the police to say, there's a black man in my house. And guess what? It's you.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm having a conversation at the moment. Something I'm writing as well, where it's literally, I wake up feeling human. Yay, doing everything that I got to do. Then I leave my house and I think, hold on a minute, I'm a black man. Oh, wow, okay. Right, how, especially the first time I had to walk into a bank and a building society wearing a mask. Difficult for a black man, thinking I've got to wear a mask. And in my mind, I'm thinking, they're saying, take off your mask because you're black. Okay, take off my mask, put your mask on because it's COVID. But it's weird. The first time I'm walking down the road wearing a mask and everyone's wearing a mask, people are staring at me weird because I'm a black man wearing a mask. But everybody's wearing a mask.
Yeah.
So it's this whole thing about being black. Black is beautiful. But at the same time, it's when I remember as a kid when we used to be watching the news and they're saying that crimes are being committed and we're sitting there as a family, we're going, please God, they're not black. Please God, they're not black. And when we hear it was a white person, we jump for joy. It's not one of us. It's not one of us, meaning that dad can walk to work safely tomorrow. Me and my brothers can walk to school safely the next day because we're not the black male that they're looking for. Whereas I bet when that happens with a white person, it's like, it's not me, and they're fine. Different ball game when you're black.
Yeah. And this is why it's so important for people to be able to tell their stories, and why what you're doing is so important, because the more, like, that literally wouldn't have even occurred to me that you would feel awkward walking into a bank wearing a COVID mask until you just said it, because that's not my daily experience. Now I know that, and now everybody listening to this knows that. Just like pay attention and listen, and every time that someone has an opportunity to amplify a story, amplify a voice, just do it, because it's so important. Do you think, I'm not going to ask you to solve the entire problem of racism in the next 2 minutes, because that's not going to happen, but do you think, I feel really strongly that books and storytelling is one of the most important ways to do this. Do you think that is a hopeful kind of outlet for things to change?
It is. But as I said, when I see myself as a storyteller who writes and speaks. So, I mean, as you can see, I've got loads of books. Love books, always love books. However, I know a lot of people who don't really read. They can, they just don't.
Yeah.
So they get their stories from films, from music, from gossip or information. So I'm looking at it to say, if every black person feels comfortable telling their own personal narrative, which could be the case of, you know what, I went to the local supermarket the other day and picked up something and this is what happened to me. For other people to go, wow, that's what happened to me as well. And I'm not black. Ooh, people are like us. Oh my gosh, they're like us. So, I mean, when my mum first came to this country, got a job, and they said to her, can't believe your English is so good. And by the way, where do you hide your tail? Yes.
Wow.
My mum said, I don't have a tail. So they said, oh, you've cut it off. So who's telling them the story that black people have tails? Yeah, true story.
I don't even know what to say to that. That's
But racism is storytelling.
yeah.
Because hundreds of years ago, people were told, white people, that black people were savages, that we were animals. So imagine, Vicky, for centuries, the story that's been passed down through your family is that black people live in the jungle, they're animals, they've got tails. And then the first black person you meet is me in 2021. Wow, James, where's your tail? Because all you know about black people is they've got a tail. And I said, Vicky, I don't have one. So you're thinking, he's cut it off, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Because it's what you believe. And racism is based on belief. It's like any argument somebody's having, what do they say to you? Huh, I don't believe you. Don't believe you. And that's anything. So if you believe that black people aren't human, because remember in enslavement times, we were classified in writing as 3/5 human, never unclassified or never reclassified as human. So that narrative hasn't changed for centuries.
Yeah.
So that's why you get the George Floyd situation. That's why you get 10 or 15 officers holding down a black man, which is why a lot of they did some research in America recently to say that almost 80% of medical professionals believe that black people have a higher pain threshold.
Yeah.
Where are they getting that from?
Stories.
They're in an industry that is based on research. But yeah, oh, that's what I've heard. And that's what I believe. Yeah. So when we're saying we need pain medication, I don't believe you. There you go. Storytelling.
Yeah. Storytelling. Use your powers for good, people, when you're telling your stories.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sitting with me today and telling me some of your story. I really appreciate it. I'm going to put you right on the spot now because I did not warn you I was going to do this. If you could recommend a book or two for people to read, any book for enjoyment, for betterment, for information, what would you recommend? I always like people to give a book recommendation.
Right. I'm going to give a shout out to an old school friend of mine. The first, and I repeat, the first Black British born novelist. His name is Norman Samuda Smith, and he wrote a book in the early 1980s called Bad Friday. Read it. He's still alive. He's a legend. He's the godfather of Black British novelists. Tell him I sent you.
Lovely. That actually arrived on my doorstep yesterday morning on your recommendation. So I'm going to be digging into that in the next couple of weeks. So thank you. And where can people find out more about you?
I'm on LinkedIn. At the moment, I'm not on Instagram. I've never been on Facebook. So look me up at LinkedIn, James Pogson, as Black British Narrative Storyteller.
Amazing. And I will put that link in the show notes as well, so people can go. I will also put a link to Norman's book in the show notes as well, so that people can go and find that. And last but not least, and this is just a bit of a teaser for the next time you're on the show, because I'm hoping you'll come back at some point. I know that you've been thinking of writing your own book. So can you just very quickly confirm or deny that rumor that I've just started?
It's true. Not just a book, a series of books.
Oh my gosh, well, there you go. That's exciting. So we're definitely going to get, well, hopefully you're going to come back on the show and talk about that when you're a little bit further along. And I'm hoping that also, if you get a little influx of people coming to find you on LinkedIn, that will encourage you to maybe talk about your series of books on LinkedIn a little bit more as well.
I'm in the process of rewriting my profile as we speak.
Amazing. And if you're after help with narrative storytelling, James is the person to go to. Go seek him out on LinkedIn, go talk to him, follow him, listen to what he's saying, listen to his stories. I think if everyone listened to each other a little bit more, the world would be a kinder place. So James, thank you so much for coming onto the show. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you here. And I will see you again soon, I hope.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Vicky.
So that was me interviewing James Pogson, who is a Black British narrative storyteller and humorist. James is writing a series of books. I'm very excited for those to come out. And just as a reminder, you can find him on LinkedIn. If you search for James Pogson on LinkedIn, the link to his profile is below the show notes. You can go and find it there. And just as a reminder, the book that he recommended is Bad Friday by Norman Samuda Smith, and you can find a link to Norman's book below as well. And Norman is also on LinkedIn. I don't know if he will connect with people or not, but you can certainly find him there. So yeah, thank you for listening. I hope you found that thought-provoking. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope that if you want to know more about narrative storytelling, you will go and seek out James on LinkedIn and find out a bit more about him, and also prod him every now and then about the progress of his book. Hopefully he'll post a little bit more on social media about that. We will be back, Joe and I will be back same time next week. We're going to be talking about the importance of language and how we use it. So tune in then. Otherwise, thanks very much for listening. See you next time.